The cold earth presses down, heavy and suffocating. Darkness surrounds you, the silence broken only by the frantic beat of your own heart. You try to scream, but the sound dies in your throat, trapped. This is the ultimate nightmare of being buried alive. Tonight, we delve into the terrifying true stories of those who faced this very horror. These are the tales of people who stared death in the face from the confines of their own tomb, their will to survive tested against the unyielding grip of the grave. The battlefield was a scene of unimaginable chaos. Explosions rocked the ground, and the air was filled with the deafening sounds of gunfire and the cries of men in combat. The air, thick with the stench of gunpowder and death, was punctuated by the cries of the wounded and the dying. The ground was littered with the fallen, and the smoke hung heavy, obscuring the sun and casting an eerie pall over the scene. Amidst the carnage, a young soldier named Thomas lay still, his eyes closed. He had been a beacon of hope and courage for his comrades, but now he was just another body on the battlefield. He had been knocked unconscious during the fighting, his body riddled with pain. The last thing he remembered was the sound of an explosion, and then nothing. When he finally awoke, the world was a suffocating black void. He couldn't see, couldn't move, and the air was thick and stale. Panic seized him as he realized the horrifying truth. He was trapped, buried alive beneath the cold, unforgiving earth. The weight of the soil pressed down on him, making it hard to breathe. The weight of the dirt pressed down on him, stealing his breath, amplifying the terror that pounded in his ears. Every breath was a struggle, every moment a battle against the suffocating darkness. He thrashed against the wooden coffin that imprisoned him, his screams muffled by the heavy layer of soil above. His mind raced, thoughts of escape mingling with the fear of an agonizing death. Each desperate gasp for air was a victory against the suffocating darkness. He fought to stay conscious, to keep the panic at bay, to find a way out of his earthen prison. Images of his life, his family, flickered through his mind, fueling his will to escape the living tomb. He thought of his mother, his father, his siblings, and the life he had yet to live. With bleeding fingers, he clawed at the wood, his desperation lending him superhuman strength. He could feel the splinters digging into his skin, but he didn't care. All that mattered was getting out. Time lost all meaning as he fought against the inevitable. Minutes felt like hours, and hours felt like days. He didn't know how long he had been buried, but he knew he couldn't give up. Just when hope began to dwindle, a sound pierced through the suffocating silence, the muffled sound of digging. It was faint, but it was there, and it gave him a renewed sense of hope. Light, a beacon of salvation, pierced the darkness as the coffin lid was ripped away. The sudden brightness was blinding, but it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Gasping for air, Thomas looked up into the face of his savior, a fellow soldier who had noticed the slight movement of the earth above his makeshift grave. The relief was overwhelming, and tears streamed down his dirt-covered face. Pulled from the clutches of death, Thomas carried the scars of his ordeal, both physical and mental. The experience had changed him, leaving him with a deep-seated fear of being buried alive. The memory of his brush with death, the feeling of the earth pressing down, the taste of soil in his mouth, forever etched into the fabric of his being. It was a tale he would carry with him for the rest of his life, a reminder of the fragility of life and the strength of the human spirit. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and the hushed whispers of mourning guests. The room was filled with an overwhelming sense of sorrow as friends and family gathered to pay their final respects. The atmosphere was heavy, almost suffocating, as if the very walls were absorbing the grief of those present. Inside the ornate coffin lay a young woman named Eliza, her face pale and still. She looked serene, almost as if she were merely sleeping, but the truth was far more tragic. Her beauty, even in this state, was undeniable, and it only added to the heartbreak of those who loved her. Unbeknownst to the grieving crowd, Eliza was not at peace, for she was not dead. The mourners, lost in their sorrow, had no inkling of the nightmare that was unfolding beneath their very feet. They wept and whispered, sharing memories of a life they believed had ended too soon. A rare medical condition had rendered her comatose, her vital signs so faint as to be undetectable. This condition, known to only a few, had fooled even the most experienced doctors. They had declared her dead, unaware that her heart still beat, albeit weakly, within her chest. As the coffin was lowered into the ground, Eliza stirred from her death-like slumber. The movement was slight, almost imperceptible, but it was a sign of life. The mourners, oblivious to this miracle, continued their somber ritual, sealing her fate with each shovelful of earth. The darkness was all-encompassing, the silence broken only by the muffled sounds of the receding footsteps of her mourners. Eliza's senses slowly returned, and with them, the horrifying realization of her predicament. She was trapped, buried alive in a coffin, with no way to escape. Panic swelled within her as she realized the horrifying reality of her situation. Her breathing quickened, and her heart pounded in her chest. She tried to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the heavy velvet lining of the coffin. The weight of the earth above pressed down on her, making it difficult to move. She pushed against the coffin lid, her screams muffled by the heavy velvet lining and the weight of the earth above. Her fingers clawed at the wood, but it was no use. The coffin was too strong and the earth too heavy. Desperation set in as she realized that her efforts were futile. Days turned into an eternity of darkness and despair. Time lost all meaning as she lay there, trapped in the suffocating blackness. Her mind raced, filled with thoughts of escape, but her body grew weaker with each passing moment. The hope that had once burned brightly within her began to fade. Eliza's hope dwindled with each passing hour, her cries for help swallowed by the cold, uncaring earth. She could feel her strength waning, her will to survive slipping away. The darkness seemed to close in around her, suffocating her spirit as well as her body. Fate, however, had a different plan. Just when all seemed lost, a glimmer of hope appeared. It was as if the universe had decided that her story was not yet over, that she still had a chance to escape her grim fate. A gravedigger making his rounds was startled by a faint scratching sound coming from Eliza's grave. At first he thought it was his imagination, but the sound persisted. It was faint but unmistakable, and it sent a chill down his spine. Driven by curiosity and a sliver of unease, he began to dig. Each shovelful of earth brought him closer to the source of the sound. His heart raced as he worked, the anticipation building with each passing moment. He had no idea what he would find, but he knew he had to keep going. As the coffin lid was pried open, Eliza's terrified eyes met the astonished gaze of the gravedigger. The light was blinding after days of darkness, and it took a moment for her to adjust. When she did, she saw the gravedigger's face, a mix of shock and relief. She was alive, a miracle that defied all odds. The gravedigger could hardly believe his eyes. He had heard stories of people being buried alive, but he never thought he would witness it firsthand. He quickly helped her out of the coffin, his hands trembling with the enormity of what had just happened. The news of Eliza's resurrection spread like wildfire through the town. People were amazed and horrified in equal measure. They gathered in small groups, whispering about the miracle that had taken place. Eliza's story became the talk of the town, a legend that would be told for generations. Her story, a chilling reminder of the fragility of life and the terrifying possibility of being buried alive, left an indelible mark on the community. It served as a stark warning of the thin line between life and death, and the importance of never giving up hope, no matter how dire the circumstances. The hospital room was cold and sterile, the silence broken only by the rhythmic beeping of machines. The air was thick with the scent of antiseptic, a constant reminder of the clinical environment. On the bed lay a man named John, his face ashen, his body still. He looked like a mere shadow of his former self, a stark contrast to the vibrant man he once was. He had been in a car accident, his injuries severe. The crash had left him with multiple fractures and internal injuries, a grim testament to the violence of the impact. The doctors, after a series of tests, declared him dead. They had done everything they could, but his vital signs were non-existent, and they had no reason to believe otherwise. John, however, was not gone. His mind was very much alive, trapped in a body that refused to respond. He was trapped in a state of paralysis, fully conscious but unable to move or speak. It was as if he were a prisoner in his own body, screaming silently for help. As he lay there, Listening to the hushed whispers of doctors and the muffled sobs of his family, a sense of dread washed over him. He wanted to reach out, to tell them he was still there, but his body betrayed him. He was going to be buried alive. The thought was more terrifying than the accident itself, a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. His worst nightmare became a horrifying reality as he felt the coffin being lowered, the earth hitting the lid with a sickening thud. Each shovelful of dirt was like a nail in his coffin, sealing his fate. The darkness was absolute, the silence deafening. He could hear his own heartbeat, a frantic drumbeat in the oppressive quiet. John was trapped in a prison of his own body, his mind racing with terror. He tried to move, to scream, but his body remained unresponsive. Days turned into an agonizing blur. Time lost all meaning as he lay there, his mind oscillating between hope and despair. John's hope dwindled with each passing moment, his thirst unbearable, his body aching. The physical pain was excruciating, but the mental anguish was even worse. Then a faint glimmer of light appeared in the distance. It was so faint that he thought he might be imagining it, a cruel trick of his desperate mind. A group of teenagers on a dare had wandered into the cemetery. They were laughing and joking, unaware of the horror that lay beneath their feet. One of them, drawn by a strange premonition, approached John's grave. He felt an inexplicable pull, a sense that something was not right. As they listened, they could hear a faint tapping sound coming from beneath the earth. It was so faint that they almost missed it, but it was there, a desperate plea for help. Terrified but compelled to help, they alerted the authorities. The police arrived quickly, their faces grim as they realized the gravity of the situation. When the coffin was opened, John was found alive, his eyes wide with terror and relief. He gasped for air, his body trembling as he was lifted out of his premature grave. His story sent shockwaves through the community, a chilling testament to the enduring power of the human spirit and the terrifying possibility of being buried alive. It was a stark reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance in the face of tragedy. These stories, as harrowing as they are, offer a glimmer of hope. They remind us of the indomitable spirit that resides within us all, the will to survive even in the face of unimaginable terror. The fear of being buried alive is a primal one, a fear that speaks to our deepest vulnerabilities. But these tales also caution us against complacency, reminding us that life is fragile and death sometimes can be mistaken.